Hello again, welcome back. Excuse me? You don't want to study? No, I'm sorry, that's out of the question. That's out of the question. No, I get your point. Te entiendo, tu comprendo. Studying is not always the most attractive activity in the world. I understand that. So I get your point. But it's out of the question. You have to study. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, but you have to study. And if you listen to Richard Brown, in a few minutes, he will continue with this. What's the point in studying? ¿Para qué vale? ¿Qué utilidad tiene? ¿Para qué sirve? What's the point? What's the point in studying? I get your point. I understand. But you have to study. To try to learn English without studying is out of the question. So, remember, the people who reach the promised land with English are the people who study.
Bien, estamos de vuelta con otra frase repleta de cosas interesantes. Bien, la frase en cuestión es "Don't get me wrong. I see your point, but it's completely out of the question". ¿Ok? Eso significa no me malinterpretes. Sé lo que quieres decir, pero es completamente impensable. ¿Vale? Vamos por la primera parte. Don't get me wrong. No me malinterpretes. En inglés hay varias formas de decir malinterpretar. Misunderstand, ¿ya? O misinterpret. Pero en este caso, tan coloquial y tan común de no me malinterpretes, siempre decimos don't get me wrong. Don't get me wrong. I didn't mean that. No quería decir eso. Don't get me wrong. I really meant something completely different, okay? Don't get me wrong. That's not the case. No es el caso. Simply, don't get me wrong. ¿Vale? Don't get me wrong. It's completely and utterly false. Completely and utterly. Aquí tenemos nuestra palabra del día, que es el adverbio utterly. Todos conocéis completely. Pues tiene un hermano gemelo, que es utterly, que suelen ir de la par. Completely and utterly. It's completely and utterly wrong. Or it's completely and utterly untrue.
Oh, hello there. I'm going to talk to you about my friends here in the hotel a little bit. Don't get me wrong, they're very nice, but they're a bit stupid, you know. And especially that George. I mean, don't get me wrong. Don't get me wrong. He's a lovely boy, but he is particularly stupid. ¿Has escuchado? He dicho, don't get me wrong. No me malinterpretes. Dilo conmigo. Don't get me wrong. Muy bien. Don't get me wrong. No voy a chismorrear más. No. Oh, but that Felicity. Don't get me wrong. She's very enthusiastic. Lovely girl, but... And, you know, Wayne, don't get me wrong. He's lovely, very enthusiastic, but a bit strange, to be honest with you. And Harriet, don't get me wrong, she's okay, but no, not really.
Don't get me wrong. I see your point. No me malinterpretes. Veo lo que quieres decir o entiendo lo que quieres decir, ¿ok? Aquí el uso del verbo to see realmente significa entiendo, ¿ok? I see. I see. That's interesting. I don't see what you mean. No veo, no entiendo lo que quieres decir. O sea que cuando empleamos el verbo to see con el auxiliar don't en el negativo, suele ser no entiendo y no veo. Porque cuando es no veo es I can't see. Bien, volvemos con la siguiente parte de esta porción, esta parte de nuestra frase, que es I see your point. A point es algo que alguien ha dicho, normalmente algo importante, interesante, relevante o contundente. That's a good point. Eso es muy interesante lo que acabas de decir. Se dice mucho. That's a good point. I see your point. Entiendo lo que quieres decir. Yeah? Do you see my point? ¿Entiendes lo que quiero decir? That's an interesting point. Que lo que acabas de decir es muy interesante. Yeah? That's a particularly relevant point to to what we're going to talk about. There's another point we have to talk about. Hay otro tema de discusión de que hay que hablar, okay? Don't get me wrong. No me malinterpretes. I see your point.
Olé! It's another beautiful day here in Spain, and a very special day because I'm going to reserve a place in a caseta in the Feria de Sevilla, the Seville Fair. Hello? Yes? Hi, yes, I'd like to make a reservation for a caseta in the fair, yes. What? Yes, I understand your point. I see your point. Yes, I see your point. One moment. Entiendo lo que quieres decir. En inglés se dice, I see your point. I see your point. He's telling me that I can't go. What? But if you saw me, you'd realize that I'm practically Spanish. I mean, I've been here for a year. Can't you see my point? Yes, I see your point. I understand, but I'm practically Spanish. I deserve to be there. Can't you see my point? Come on.
Good. Let's go over the whole sentence. Vamos a repasar la frase entera. Don't get me wrong. I see your point, but it's completely out of the question. Bien, esa tercera parte de la frase. It's completely out of the question. Significa, pues, es completamente impensable o de ninguna manera. ¿Vale? Puedo decir, that's completely out of the question. O, empleando nuestra palabra del día, that's completely and utterly out of the question. Que literalmente significa, eso es completamente y completamente fuera de... es impensable, vamos. Pero decimos completamente dos veces. Completely and utterly. Completely and utterly. Completely and utterly. It's completely and utterly out of the question. I'm sorry, but that's out of the question. I'm sorry, but that's completely out of the question. It's an interesting point, but it's out of the question. The point you have just made, lo que acabas de decir, is completely out of the question. Don't get me wrong. No me malinterpretes, huh? Don't get me wrong. It's an interesting point, but it's out of the question. Don't get me wrong, it's a very interesting point, but it's completely out of the question. Or it's completely and utterly out of the question. Para más énfasis todavía. See you soon.
I'm having a look at the suggestion box to see what people are complaining about. Let's take a look. More flexible shifts. Impensable. Out of the question. Flexible shifts? Out of the question. Out of the question. Impensable. Out of the question. A ver qué más hay. Happy hour? Come on! Out of the question. Completely out of the question. What else? What else? New pillows? New pillows? Impensable. Out of the question. These pillows are my grandmother's. Out of the question. Let's see. We all feel really hungry. We need lunch breaks. George. Oh, right. Out of the question. George, I see your point. Don't get me wrong, but that is out of the question.